I am Asha Dore, and this is Totally Biased Reviews with Shane Hinton, and we're here to talk about his books, Radio Dark and Pinkies.
I am an author and an editor. As you said, I published a couple of books with a small press, Borough Press, based in Orlando, Florida. Um, I am the editor of an anthology of Florida writers writing about Florida called We Can't Help It If We're From Florida. And I'm also a fiction editor for the Tampa Review, which is the literary journal of the University of Tampa, where I teach. I am deeply distrustful of biographies, but I'm learning to be. Uh, um I'm learning that they are a necessary part of professional life, and I guess I should just like suck it up and make them because it's not really that big of a deal to tell people what you've done. But I sympathize with people that don't want to engage with that practice because it does feel weirdly self-congratulatory or something.
Yeah, I get that too, but I think your books are awesome, and I want people to know about them and buy them and read them. And is the best place to get both of these books just directly from Borough Press?
Yeah, I mean, I think with small presses, absolutely, if you can stomach going to a small press's website and ordering directly from them is always the best way to support a small press.
Yeah.
Burrow has recently started a partnership with this new distributor called Asterism Books, and they are really, really incredible. They have a great business model for small presses. It's um this all kind of happened like this is like some inside baseball stuff, I guess, but SPD, small press distributors or distribution or something, was the kind of house that distributed a lot of small presses for a long time and was, like made it so that they could be ordered by bookstores and things like that. But they went out of business recently, and Asterism was already around, and it was very fortunate that they were in business because they have really filled that void, which is necessary if small press books are going to have any sort of wide distribution. So, yeah, from Burrow or from Asterism, from your local independent bookstore
Awesome.
or whatever, Amazon if you want to roll the dice and maybe get a dress instead.
You wrote Pinkies like 8 to 9 years ago, and Radio Dark, doing math, 5 years ago-ish. I think the coolest thing about talking to writers in retrospect is that I think answers change a lot. And when I think about Radio Dark and the like pandemic vibes of that book, that it came out like right before the pandemic hit, I'm wondering if that has changed how you see that book or anything about that.
So yeah, it's like it's unavoidable in talking about that book now that it is a book about a pandemic, which actually, it was written kind of in conversation with a pandemic that happened really part of the 20th century. Well, anyway, there was this really interesting condition that like started affecting people after the Spanish flu, basically. And it was like turning people catatonic essentially, and there were these like whole care centers set up to just like care for these people that were all of a sudden totally unable to exercise any sort of free will. They would just be like led around and placed in chairs by the window and fed. So as I was writing that book, I was thinking a lot about that condition. But obviously it came out at the end of 2019. So in 2020 when there was another pandemic. Now, anytime I talk about the book, it is clearly related in people's minds to that. But to me, that book actually has a different kind of an association because it was like a really dark book. Um, it's intentionally so, I think it's like maybe a little bit funny or whatever, but I like set out to write a really, really bleak book. I was thinking a lot of Blindness by Jose Saramago, and I was thinking a lot of like the road, Cormac McCarthy, and also I was in the middle of a really long mental health crisis, so my relationship to that book now largely is that I can hardly honestly bear to look at it because it feels so desperately sad to me. Which it's not to say that I don't think people should read it because I'm proud of the work, but I think it is a very accurate it's funny. Like there's somebody on Goodreads, and I know you're like I shouldn't be reading these things, but a lot of the people on Goodreads who don't like the book talk about how it's kind of hopeless and meaningless, and it's like accurate. I feel it is a pretty hopeless and largely meaningless book in terms of like the way that we construct meaning about in literature or in life, I guess. Um, but yeah, so certainly some pandemic stuff, but even more so than that, I would say, to me, when I look at it now, what I see, and thankfully, like I've gotten a lot better, by the way. I want to like include that narrative arc by saying that I'm no longer in the same place. And I do think that like writing the book definitely helped me process a lot of that. But yeah, for me, my relationship with that book is that it's like it hurt to write it and it hurts now to read it.
That makes sense. I mean, to me, that means that there's something really real in it. I'm going to read the blurb from Borough Press. A mysterious condition sweeps the country, leaving its victims in a catatonic state. The power grid fails and the world goes dark. Somewhere in Florida, where the sprawling suburbs meet a dying citrus grove, a janitor at a small community radio station, an FCC field agent, and a DJ attempt to restore order and humanity. They build a radio tower to recruit survivors. As newcomers arrive and occupy the homes of the affected, a community grows and thrives. But when supplies dwindle and more people succumb to the condition, a doomsday preacher arrives to test the limits of the community, and the radio tower, once seen as a marvel, begins to look like an abomination. It makes sense. Like, I think that book is bleak. I also think it's really funny. I mean, I think that that's one of my favorite things about your writing is just that there is this really like often understated humor that sometimes will like land with me like a couple beats after I read some dialogue or a paragraph or something like that. And it's just like these little moments in between characters where like people are connecting and disconnecting in ways that are unexpected, but I think like really realistic and relatable. What I appreciate about that book is just that like I think now that we've been through like a pandemic that we can all like recognize and talk about, it's it was bleak and people did come together and then that did fall apart over and over and over. I mean, I think that's really accurate to the way that we operate as humans, and that redemption narrative doesn't really fit like our timelines ever, right? That it came out right before one sucks for marketing. Like that, you probably didn't get to like go on tour or anything for that book, right?
I mean, like it came out in the fall of 2019, so I certainly could have done some stuff, but I just was really not in a place to accommodate that level of human interaction, honestly. I mean, it's something I actually feel really guilty about now because I love my publisher, and Burrow has been great to me, and Ryan Rivas, who's the publisher of Burrow Press, is one of the best friends I've ever had, and somebody I deeply respect, as, not only as an editor and publisher, both of which he's incredible at, but also as a writer and just as a person. So it's definitely something I carry some regret about. Everything that you just said, is true. And actually, what I was kind of thinking of as you were talking there was that it's really a goal of mine. I think make stories that reflect reality as much as I am capable of doing so. And in order to do that, I often really reject the kind of artifice of fiction writing, right? That like the like the ideas about like what a plot should look like, and um, even in, so like in Radio Dark, it's in this like, very weird point of view. I've realized I wasn't really thinking much about it and as I was writing it, but it's in this very, very objective third person point of view. And you like never see the interiority of the characters hardly. I mean, very, very little, even when you are seeing it, it's like delivered really without emotion, and there's a lot of like terrible stuff happening. And I definitely think I was aware that that was happening, but it's something that I think is I was doing intentionally to make a weird distance between the reader and like what the what in a normal apocalypse or dystopia narrative would be. I was rereading the Goodreads reviews the other day, and one of the like another astute bad review said like nothing is more important than anything else in this book or something. And oh yeah, that's exactly right. Like you're right. Like that is how I was constructing it. It is a world full of like the world is ending, everybody is dying, bodies are decaying, civilization is collapsing, and moment to moment, none of that stuff feels any more notable than anything else. I don't know. It's interesting, but I think that is true to my experience of life, which is that it is often only kind of in hindsight when we are like internally constructing narratives of our lives that we are like making note of high watermarks and saying, oh, that was a really important moment and that was a really important moment. Usually as these things are happening, they are just happening and maybe in some sort of like evolutionary survival tactic or something. We are just allowing them to happen and moving us forward. So I have always been kind of distrustful of fiction. I mean, don't get me wrong, like I love genre fiction, for instance. Like I love reading horror. I read horror novels all the time. But I recognize that it is leaning on a convention in terms of plot structure in order to provoke me into feeling something. And I feel misled when fiction that purports to be literary and without genre appears to be presenting itself as innovative or as experimental, and really it's actually just kind of relying on the same events that have been constructed by earlier writers. I find myself really interested in fiction that doesn't necessarily embrace the ways that we or the values that we expect fiction to have, right? Like I love absurdist fiction. I love fiction. I've always really loved writers that much more boldly than I do, like reject those ideas about what storytelling is and just tell stories with no or with a value system that you like have to discern as you read it. I'm not as good as many of those writers. I think that's what keeps it interesting for me. And yeah, that sense of like bleakness and hopelessness was certainly true to where I was at in my life in that time period. And yeah, like as a matter of fact, I mean the pandemic stuff escalated that so much to me that really that was the kind of like breaking that bottomed me out and caused me to actually like get help and ultimately get better. But yeah, I mean that is I think my ultimate goal always is to kind of write things that really reflect my experience of life as accurately as I can and not just kind of rely on narrative tricks.
That resonates a lot with me. That's what I like about all of your work that I've read is just that there's kind of this openness. There's like a permission to just experience a really realistic experience, even if the events that are happening are really absurd. And I think that it's like there's a tone of being in the present moment, like something about the tone, like showcases that these characters are in the present moment. They're dealing with things in the way that they would, and they're not editorializing their own life. the narrator's not editorializing things in ways that are manipulative, like you're talking about. And I think that review, you know, even if the person reviewing you didn't like that, I think that's what I like about your books. I mean, even during the real pandemic, when everything first shut down, people were freaking out about like not being able to have enough toilet paper for like the next 100 years or whatever stocked up in their house. I mean, it's like that's actually what people do. Like we develop these little sidelined mini crises to deal with the actual crisis that we're dealing with, so that we don't have to face the actual crisis in a way that we'll someday be able to face only in retrospect, like you were saying. I think that that's one of the most human things ever. And, you know, even when people are able to engage in a crisis really directly, like a Navy SEAL or something, they're doing something that they were trained to do. They're doing something that's like routine to them. You know, they're following steps. It's the same thing as like making a sandwich or going shopping and buying toilet paper. Like we rely on these routines and these learned things. And I just really like that, because I think that you're right. There's not a lot of that in novels these days. Like we're very often being told what to think about whatever is happening. And I what I really like too about Radio Dark and Pinkies is just like, and your new work is just like these like little points of like super absurdity that are taken with such like casual, you know, like the characters are just very chill about really, really intense things that happen. And I think that the blurb doesn't really like showcase how fun that is in all of your work. Like, I love the playfulness in that, because even if Radio Dark is about, you know, a whole bunch of people going catatonic and dying and the world ending and everything, it's still really playful. People are kind of silly sometimes. They make really weird choices together. You know, like they come together to making these like really strange choices that you would think you would never make, but can somehow relate to them making in that situation.
I really appreciate you saying that, and it means a lot to me actually. You know, I um, take it truly as the highest compliment when somebody tells me something I've written is funny, because to me that is the hardest thing to do, and I don't really ever set out to do it. I just think, you know, I love to laugh and I don't take much very seriously, so I'm happy that that comes through. But you know, the other thing that I think is really great about and generous about what you said there is that, like, it's very important to me as a writer. I am not a reader who is terribly patient, and I have a lot of things that I could do with my time. And if a book doesn't take care of me, I just don't. I'm going to do something else, you know. So oftentimes I feel it is such a burden to accomplish a writing project that it can you know, it can be easy to just say, okay, well, I have gotten that off of my chest and now I am improved for having done it. But if I am going the next step and asking for somebody else's time and attention in terms of, you know, submitting it for publication or sending it out into the world in some way, it's really important to me that it be something that is an engaging experience for a reader. Mhm. And even despite having, as I said, like having a kind of bias against that conventional plot structure, which I mean, whatever, like I still structure plots, you know, in a way that would be recognizable, I think, to a Western reader. But like having a kind of bias against the system of values that has grown up around the idea of commercial fiction, I guess, in the last few hundred years. I want it to be like, I want to tell a story that gets your blood pumping a little bit. You know, I mean, that's like my goal. Like it can do all these other things too. It can be a reflection of my experience of the world and my beliefs or whatever. But if it doesn't make you want to find out how it ends, then I think it has failed.
I think that's true too. what do you think about Pinkies now that it's been a really long time since that book came out? Like, and I haven't read it in a while. I mean, I have this print that I bought in Mexico. I need to send you a picture of it if I haven't yet. That always reminds me of that story where the woman wakes up with the face in her vagina, and there's like some deity or something. So there's like all these pictures of a woman with a head in her vagina in Mexico City. If you've never seen that, I hope that you get a chance to, because it's really fun. But anyway, what do you think about that? Like, in retrospect, the stories are fairly linked, right? Like, I mean, it's like the auto fiction thing. Tell me about that.
Yeah, Pinkies. So Pinkies was my first book. It was a collection of short stories that I really wrote as an escape valve from when I was working on my MFA thesis. I was supposed to be working on that, and instead I wrote that other book. And I think you can definitely look at it and say there is a link between the stories. I think it has cohesion, like a good story collection should. Again, as I think about it now, largely my experience or my relationship to that book is it was written at a time when my wife Jess was, pregnant with what would be our twin daughters, and I was worried, like finishing up my MFA and kind of thinking about what my life would look like after all of that was over. It was a really, really intense time period, and it fit very naturally with my sense that nothing um, in the world that is supposed to be meaningful as an adult like really makes much sense. Like I just feel like I'm locked out of the system of meaning that so many people seem to have access to. Like I don't know. I set out, I think, to write a series of stories, each of which kind of had this very, very absurd premise. And many of them are very short. Some of them feature the same narrator, it appears. I like that book. It doesn't make it, it was, it doesn't cause me the same level of pain. And again, I always feel kind of bad the way I feel about that book because like I said, I'm proud of it and we worked hard on making it good. And when I look back at it, I'm like, I'm proud of it. Um, it's just that it was about some stuff that was really hard for me to go through. So the Pinkies is a little, I think, lighter.
I can see like Pinkies is definitely has a little bit more like pizzazz in the absurdity and stuff like that. But I think that Radio Dark is a really strong, good book. I like that book. I don't read that much fiction, like compared to other genres, like fiction. Most fiction that everybody says is good, I find to be really difficult to pay attention to. So I find the things that I like. And even experimental fiction, I find to be often both experimental in form and content, and therefore, like, I mean, I have to dedicate a lot to that. And I sometimes feel a little bit pissed off that people are trying to make me like spend my whole life figuring it out when they could just kind of give me a hinge or something. But I think that Radio Dark is really cool because it does not follow the kind of plot that you would expect, but the tone and the language is very like casual, and you know it just like it's readable. It's not like super fancy, but I understand like that it seems like it was reflective of a dark time. Pinkies is a really, really fun book. It reminds me of like Russian um absurdist literature, which I think you like that stuff a lot still, right?
Yeah, that is definitely one of my favorite eras. You said something that I think is true, is really important to me, right? I'm always wondering, or I'm always rather asking myself, like, what are the barriers between this thing that I'm writing and the reader? what hurdles am I asking them to jump? And I'm almost always, so far it's like I'm a big proponent of like writing uncomfortably, like writing things that push you and make you stretch yourself as a writer. And it occurred to me within the last couple of years that at some point the thing that is going to be the most uncomfortable to me is to write like a quiet domestic drama of some kind, like so I'm gonna have to write like a romantic comedy or something.
Mhm.
The problem that I'm coming to understand about myself is that, or I've been working on this project the last few years, and I really wanted it to be something, and then it evolved into this other thing, which nonetheless I'm like happy with. But what it revealed to me was that I am incapable of deciding the kind of writer I want to be. I think some people are capable of that. Like they just seem to make a decision that they're going to be a crime writer or like a mystery writer or something, and that's what they write. And every time I try to make those kinds of choices consciously, I just sabotage myself and blow it up. And it always ends up becoming these kinds of stories, which are like just the kinds of stories that I would write, I guess, which are very like strange, and they're dark, and they're hopefully like a little bit funny. But um, I have really just, I think, processed within the last year that I just have to accept the kind of writer I am. You know, somebody told me last year, know what kind of writer you are, and that was really meaningful to me because you know what, I already know what kind of writer I am, and this sense that I'm somehow going to deviate from that for some career reason or something, just for me, it's just not true. And honestly, I wouldn't want it to be, because I want more out of my relationship to writing than that. I don't care about so much about I mean, frankly, I just don't really care about like selling books and things like that. I mean, I love that that I'm extraordinarily privileged that people can read my books, and that they can order them on Amazon, and that they're, even like it's so funny because like I don't take the bad Goodreads reviews very seriously, or rather, I don't take them negatively. I mean, I feel, if anything, maybe a little guilty that, because I know I'm writing things that a lot of people that will not resonate for a lot of people, because um I read a lot of things that don't resonate with a lot of people. So if anything, I feel I've kind of tricked certain people into reading my book somehow, and that there are a few of those reviews where people are clearly just kind of angry at the time that they spent reading a book that does not conform to their expectations of what a book should be. um which is, what can I say? It's like you would probably be happier. There are a lot of books that would have probably made you happier to read, but hopefully there are people out there who, I guess what I've come to understand about myself and my writing is that I am often hurting in my life, and I don't really know why, you know. And a lot of my relationship to the creative process has been that it allows me to understand myself and my um, worldview more clearly. And so that once I've written something, I now understand what it was that was causing me discomfort, and I can maybe move on from it or incorporate it into my understanding of myself or something, and become more expansive. So the good experiences that I have had with readers, I feel like, have been with people with whom I have a kind of kinship in that regard. That I think there are, those of us who just feel like we life is so complicated and impossible to understand, and like kind of like mean that it can really help sometimes to just have somebody, sing you a song or tell you a story that reinforces that it's okay to feel those things.
I think that's true. To me, I mean, I think that's like the whole purpose of art, but I guess there are people who are not like me on the planet. But I mean, it's just making sense of those things. That makes a lot of sense. And also the people who maybe feel pissed off that they spent the time with a book that didn't conform, like that's kind of cool. I mean, like that someone would stick with it to the end and write a review about how they didn't like something about it. I always find that to be so awesome. It's like, wow, like you're really thinking about this shit, like that you have enough energy to like go on. Like I love so many books and I fucking suck at writing reviews on Goodreads. Like that's like one of my goals this year is to be a person who writes reviews of the books that I've read on that place. So, rock on that those people didn't like it enough to think about it. Probably it's going to mean something to them at some point, even if they don't know it.
I've been, again, like I've been very fortunate. I have some very nice people. I've written some very kind reviews on Goodreads, and I really appreciate those. But nonetheless, my favorite Goodreads review of all time was of Pinkies, and the woman just said, "This is the worst book I've ever read." And I thought, that's really kind of an accomplishment.
Yeah, that's kind of a big one. I would like look at her reviews and see what what book she likes.
Yeah, yeah. I friended her, and I don't think she realized like it was me because she accepted it. But I really was. I don't know. Like, yeah, maybe if it truly was the worst book she's ever read, then maybe she will remember it. It's a terrible rabbit hole to go down, basically. But like I said, well, for me, I think the truth of it is, I wrote for many years, um, and nobody read it, or very few people read it, and I continued doing it because it is just who I am. So it's really incredible that I'm now at a point in my life where enough people have read my books that I can go on and anonymously. I've never met these people, probably won't ever meet them, but we've had this relationship. Yeah, this is like low level musing on what publication is, I guess, but it really still kind of blows my mind that I have been fortunate enough in this life to have made something that even had the opportunity to be in conversation with other people. It's very cool.
I think it is really cool. Do you want to talk at all about what you're working on right now?
Sure, yeah. So I've got another book that is coming out with Burrow next year in 2025. And it is I think we're going to call it a novel in stories, is how we're terming it. I have been thinking of it as a memoir in lies. um, and it is, each story or each chapter kind of takes a horror subgenre as its starting point. And it was my attempt actually to write a horror book because I really think that would be cool. But I apparently just am not capable of doing that. So um, it is a collection of linked stories, much more tightly linked than Pinkies was, though I do think it is definitely kind of like a follow up to that book in a lot of ways. Autofiction. It's called the title. Anyway, the title is Other Shane Hintons, and it's about think different moments in my life, I guess, when there were inflection points, and I could have been one person or another one. I'm very excited about it. I have to say, I do think it's it's like a dangerous thing I'm feeling a little bit probably, but I feel like I don't even know if I should say this, I guess, but I feel like it is the best thing I've ever written, which feels good. But probably we all just think that, oh, at the
I
end
think
of the
it's okay to
project.
feel good about your work. I think that's a good thing. You can feel good about
Is
it.
it?
Yeah. And also it's really fucking cool. Like, I don't think I've read or seen a book in a while that attempted to sort of do a hybrid between nonfiction and fiction with an absurdist lean. And if they're out there, you should tell me about them so that I can read them because I think it's really fucking cool. And what I really love about this idea of, finding the space between all of those directions, is just that like I think in fiction, people are really like often flamboyantly talking about what they think is true, but they feel really free to talk about it. And then in nonfiction, people are feeling really limited and trying really hard to not lie or change things in any way. And it's just this kind of weird dance that we do that's really based on how we think readers are going to perceive the genre that we're writing in. What I like about the idea of making a sort of autofiction memoir hybrid that's got these like horror or absurdist elements in it is just this acceptance that like we do see the world in these absurd ways and we're just always kind of full of shit in our perceptions. So, like what is the best metaphor for this moment so that I can connect with another person and help them understand my perception and experience of that. If you're free to do that and you can think about anything happening, it just seems like an opportunity to be really playful in a place that's usually really tense for, I think, the writer and the reader, just in like, what is the truth in that question of what is the truth? You don't have to worry about that. And you just accept it as all the truth and all fiction at the same time. Then you get to like really think about it and have fun.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is a deeply held belief of mine is I think of myself primarily as a storyteller. I think that is my role in this life. And I just believe, I don't know where I got this belief from exactly, but I believe that the story is truer than the truth. Um, I mean, I think there is absolutely value to facts and verifiable information, but yeah, somehow we have like culturally we prize that so much more than the emotional truth of something, which to me has a relationship to whatever the the facts of the events as they happened are, but is so much more important than those facts could ever communicate.
I love that. The story is truer than the truth. I think that's true. It one of the things that I have like learned from parenting is and teaching kids and teaching adults is that like it's always better to speak to people's emotions and like ignore whatever the fuck they're saying. Like pretty much ignore every detail that comes out of their mouth if they're upset about something or whatever and just kind of only try to understand like the emotion. Even if it's a small thing like, you know, my assignment is late because or whatever. It's like, oh, you're stressed. Like you're anxious. That's all that really fucking matters. Like the only way to operate in this world and actually connect with people is to ignore all the details. And so if the details can be used instead to point you at the emotional truth, I think that's like the opportunity of writing. It's to me, it's like why we watch movies and write almost completely. And also to like invite each other into like the hardships of the world so that we can experience our own experiences all the way by like vicariously experiencing other people.
I Yeah, I mean, in saying that, I don't in any way mean to denigrate anybody else's good work because I I love reading nonfiction and I love reading, good long form journalism, and I think that is really important work. But I again, it's just one of those things. I mean, like, I think I'm settling into accepting who I am, and for me, it's much more about trying to understand the world and then express that in a form that is as close to accurate as I can muster with no actual regard for what normal people would consider accuracy. I would love it for people to read my books. I'm like I try to speak honestly about my experience of them, and I don't want that to discourage people from, from reading it. But um, I would love people to read Radio Dark. I think it's a very meaningful book to me, despite the fact that it's hard for me to look at now. I think that there is a a certain type of person going through a certain type of thing for whom it might be helpful, if this is how I've recalibrated my thinking about writing and literature and my career, is that the only thing that I am putting any emphasis or value on is whether or not it is helpful to somebody else. And so I think I can say that of my work, that it has, think truly that it has all been created in the sincere hope that somebody else would find it helpful.
Since I've known you, you've always been like really involved in supporting other writers and like being really connected with the community. And that all tracks for me. And I think that that's true. And like, I'll just say that, Radio Dark is not a hard experience for me. So I think it's excellent. And I really appreciate, like we've talked a lot about the absurd stuff and the horror stuff, but your writing has such restraint, and it always has, like even back when we were in undergrad, which I think is very rare for absurdist fiction. Only a few writers, I think, who exhibit restraint and don't just like lean into like the grotesque stuff like beat after beat after beat. And I really appreciate that.
I appreciate that. Yeah, uh, that's very kind of you to say. I certainly, I mean, that's what I would say is I do, like, I am trying to be as I'm trying my number one goal is to write the book that I wish that I had read, or that like the thing that I think would have helped me the most. But in doing that, really what I'm trying to trick myself into doing is to imagine the book that would be most helpful for some other faceless person that I have not met. So, or it is important to me, I guess is what I mean to say. It is important to me that it's not just fully on the throttle all the time, or not perceived that way, because sometimes I do feel like that's maybe a weakness of mine, because that in itself is like I've come to recognize as like a defense mechanism. Is like, if I'm too afraid of being vulnerable, I will just ratchet up the weirdness or the gore or something. So I'm learning to not hide behind that stuff, but rather to maybe use really strange and unexpected aspects of the the story as it, comes to me, in order to understand something that I'm experiencing from an angle that I didn't anticipate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's what makes it like possible for me to read about some of the gore. Cause like at this point in my life, I used to be really different, but like at this point in my life, I don't even like watch horror movies or anything that's like gross. I mean, the only show that I can handle gore from is The Boys, and I don't know why that show doesn't bother me, because it's really fucking disgusting. I don't know if you've seen it. It's like it's really gross. I mean, there's like always somebody's body sliding in half or something like really intense. But I think it's like it's at least the first couple seasons like do kind of the same thing that your books and stories do, or where it's just like, okay, yes, everyone in this room's head exploded at like almost the same time, like, but it meant something, so it's okay. Like, or it like made me think about something. So I can handle it because I'm like, it's not just like Saw, you know, people aren't just being destroyed for no reason.
I gave a reading a few months ago. Was the like one of the first times I've read from the next book, and I read this section that is very that is very disturbing, and everybody like gasped, and I had this immediate thought. I was like, oh my god, why am I, these are probably like nice decent people, like why am I doing this to them? Why did I choose to read this terrible thing? Why did I even write this? Like, what?
You know, people like love it. I mean, there's something about like the dopamine kick, and it's like if you're gonna be a maker of something, you might as well use that to like make meaning and all kinds of stuff. Who you'd cast in the TV series or movie of either of your books. My curiosity around this is just like, who are you imagining as you write the book? Like, are you imagining like an actual actor or like a person that you know, or have you just created this thing in your mind? Like, especially with like Radio Dark. I know it's a little different with autofiction.
Yeah, so my characters, I mean, like everything is so based on myself that I really just, this is a weakness. I need to address this in my writing process. Like I should be imagining characters. I'm working on this actually. My next project is like I'm already, anyway, these are people that are not me, which is cool. But up to this point, mostly they have just been me. So it would just be an exercise in picking an actor that I think is like me, and I don't know anything very much about actors. Like I don't know them by name very well at all. Um, but I think if the reader would just imagine like Willem Dafoe playing me all the time, that would make me really happy.
That's a really good answer. Like, I had like no idea where you were gonna go with that. Yeah, I think that's great.